Hello, everybody. A true joy to meet you here once again at our Advent Life Church YouTube page. Yes, feeling better, knowing that some of you will be here at 2 p.m. Normally those who can't access YouTube for whatever reason. And yes, we've been having a good time together every Saturday at 2 p.m. So those in Santa Fe or the area are welcome to join us. Obviously, the cases of COVID in New Mexico are going up. The hospitals, doctors are much more prepared these days, but we still want to be careful. So bring your masks, and we're keeping social distance, doing everything we can, not out of fear, but out of caution, out of respect for the health and well-being of our church members, especially the elderly in our midst. So we are keeping the church open. If anything changes, we'll keep you guys informed. But for today, let's pray together and let's jump into our study. Dear God, thank you for allowing us to meet here at this page, to grow together with our community and with the guests and people who are tuning in to watch the message with us, to grow and follow us on this journey through the Gospel of Matthew to see Jesus at work and to live as He did today in our world. So bless us, help us understand these ancient texts and words, and may your Spirit give us discernment to bridge this wisdom into our life and the way we live with those around us. So bless us, we ask. In the name of Jesus, amen. All right, guys. Well, last week we finished chapter 9. Today our text is Matthew 10, 1 to 15. We keep going here in our study of Matthew. And again, one thing is always connected to the other. So if things are confusing, watch the previous message. So I'll just say that last week we were introduced. Matthew gave us a little window into the heart, the mind of Jesus, as Jesus explained and talked about what ministry is to Him. And from the text last week, we learned at least two things from the ministry of Jesus. Number one, and then I wonder if I wrote this. I wrote part of it. So number one, I'll write it right here, is everything was about the gospel of the kingdom. Forgot that part. So yeah, center of Jesus' message, the center of His actions, everything He did was to show people what the kingdom of heaven was like, and that a new time had come through the work of Jesus for people to access, to live within that reality in the present time, then and in our present time now. So the work of Jesus, the ministry of Jesus, is about the announcement in words and in actions of that promised kingdom of God. So everything that is real in the kingdom of heaven now and the same kingdom when it comes can be lived, can be experienced today, thanks to Jesus, who revealed to us truly who God is and what His kingdom is all about. So Jesus healed and He taught and He cared for people, because Jesus lived and introduced the principles and the reality of the kingdom of heaven to the people of His day. Obviously, there was a lot of resistance and people against Him, because by embracing Jesus and the principles of the kingdom of heaven, people would have to let go of the principles of the kingdoms of men, the principles of empire, the principles of Rome, the principles of not caring for others but for self and a community of individuals who care for other things and not the things that truly matter to God. Sort of like today. So yeah, I was just giving a Bible study before I started recording this here to a 13-year-old who wants to be part of our community. It's amazing just to look into the eyes of a 13-year-old and explain to them the kingdom and what it means to join the community of faith. To tell them that they're the future. And if they don't understand the way of Jesus, then there is no hope. But if they do, then there's hope for the community, for the city, for everyone. And I try to make it as simple as possible. I try to say that, the way of the world is always based on self and our best interest and our convictions and ideas and feelings and going with that constantly. But to walk in the way of Jesus is to carry a cross, to die for self, for others, to turn the other cheek, and to always be mindful of what Jesus would do. So so hard for us to understand that, especially today, when society and the kingdoms of men have taught us alternative ways of engaging life. But Jesus was about the gospel of the kingdom, the good news that we can live under the rulership of Jesus, the King, and to subvert the culture of the time by vulnerability. So number 2, the thing that we learned about Jesus' ministry, apart from it being centered in the kingdom, the good news of the kingdom of heaven being a reality now, is that the ministry of Jesus was a ministry of compassion. We studied that and we understood that compassion is this gut-wrenching suffering with and for other people. So the ministry of Jesus is a ministry of being with people, with the sheep who were harassed and helpless, suffering with them. The divine solution for the abuse of the shepherds, it's fascinating, is vulnerability, is weakness, it's suffering with the helpless and harassed, with those who are abused, until God brings a resolution. To live for justice and kindness and love, while all around we have the opposite of that. So it's fascinating to live in a time where it is okay to talk about God and Jesus and still hate and be distant from people. Somehow that became a thing that does not exist in the kingdom of heaven. So to understand the ministry of Jesus is truly to keep in mind the nature of our ministry as a church family, as a community of faith. It is to talk about the gospel of the kingdom, and we'll talk more about that today, but it is to be with those who suffer, to serve, and not to think of self, to carry our cross for others, as Jesus taught us. So very good. The first section of the Gospel of Matthew up until now, up until chapter 10, showed us, revealed to us what Jesus was able to do. He taught, He spoke, He healed, He did things. And now Jesus will send 12 disciples or apostles to do the same thing. In fact, this is why the disciples, the 12, are called apostles. In the Greek, it just means that they are those who were sent out. To be an apostle is to be the one who is sent out. So in the end, we're all disciples. All the disciples are sent out by Jesus to live as Jesus lived and taught. Because Jesus never told the disciples to do something that was different from what He was doing. You see, that's what a leader does. A true leader is the one who doesn't require of his disciples and of the people who they have supervision of something different from their experience. That's why Moses was rescued from the waters, went to the wilderness, saw the firing furnace, went through all of that. What happened later in the book of Exodus? The people of Israel experienced the same thing. They were rescued from the waters, went to the desert, to Sinai. It was thundering like fire. They had the same experience as Moses. And that's why Moses was the leader, because he went through what the people would have went through after him. And that's the same thing with Jesus. Jesus sends them out to do what He did Himself. Beautiful image of what leadership is. So yes, He will send them out to do what He did, to announce the kingdom in words and in deeds, and to embody the new world, the new reality that Jesus has created through His words and actions. So last week we finished saying, that the harvest is plentiful, but laborers are few. So pray to God that God will send laborers. So the disciples are both to pray to God, to send laborers to the field, as we saw last week. But as we're going to see today, they are to become an answer to that same prayer. They are to go. They are to embrace a ministry of suffering for those who are helpless and harassed by political and religious authorities. And the disciples didn't get it. We're going to see that. And that's why we can't be hard on ourselves when we don't get it. Because our understanding of power and ministry and service and authority is so manipulated, is so shaped by the kingdoms of men that we don't understand what Jesus means when he says what he says. So today we're going to talk a little bit about that too. So our task today is quite similar to what we did last week. Last week we evaluated what ministry is to us in light of what it was to Jesus. And today we will evaluate what this ministry looks like in practice when compared to what Jesus teaches his disciples to do as he sends them out. We should also keep in mind, obviously, that Matthew wrote all these words, and I've been talking about this several times now, for the Christian community. The gospel was written way later, when the Christian churches were already expanding and growing and being persecuted. So Matthew has the communities of faith in mind. This was for them, and this is for us too. Matthew reminds what Jesus told the disciples when they went out, so that the churches would be reminded of what they needed to do, so that we today, thousands of years later, can be reminded of our role as well. Because the reality is that obviously we don't want to suffer, like we talked about last week. We live a privileged sort of ministry. We're at ease. There's no persecution, There's COVID. There's some unemployment. But our community is doing okay. We're with each other. We're visiting each other. We're participating in the joys and in the sufferings of one another. So we do ministry from this ease into service, from ease to help. And we thank God for that. I mean, this is not a bad thing. Thank goodness that we can do ministry from a place of comfort and safety. Problem is obviously when this ministry of ease from service just becomes an end in itself. This ease leads us to inaction and to just, So that's when problems normally arise. So today we need to think deeply about our condition as a community and again shape it around it, critique it under what Jesus will teach the disciples. Because obviously what matters to us, to this community, is what has been revealed about God through Jesus. So whatever Jesus says is quite important, more important than whatever I have to say or anybody else has to say. This is about following Jesus and not the opinions of people who think they are Jesus. They have a Messiah complex. So today let's just read. Let's begin reading the first 4 verses here. Chapter 10, Matthew 10. Let's read together. Text says, "And he called to him his 12 disciples and gave them authority over unclean spirits to cast them out and to heal every disease and every affliction." This is what Jesus was doing thus far. We've read it, story after story. Then Matthew writes the names. The names of the 12 apostles, big word, I just told you what it means, those who were sent out, were first Simon, who is called Peter, and Andrew his brother, James the son of Zebedee, and John his brother, Philip and Bartholomew, Thomas and Matthew the tax collector, who's writing the book, James the son of Alphaeus and Thaddeus, Simon the zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. So there's an announcement here of what's to come in the future. Not time to address it yet. We'll get there. For now, let's just pause here to talk about a little word right at the beginning. "And he called to him his 12 disciples and gave them authority." Huge word right here. And if we think about it, when you hear the word authority, what are the images that come to your mind? Think about it. What are the examples, the parameters you have in your head, in your heart, to understand what authority is? Normally, people these days don't like the sound of authority because we connect the word authority to abuse. That means that if somebody has authority, they're going to abuse it in some way. They're going to use it for oppression, for personal gain. So this is why this culture that we can call late modern or postmodern rejects any sense of authority, because history has taught us that anybody who has it abuses it. Can't take the argument away. It's true. We are humans after all, and when we get some sort of power or authority, we are always tempted to use it to personal gain. So yeah, that's why it's complicated to understand what authority is. Even in churches, people don't understand what authority is. See? I remember when I first came in here to Santa Fe, that was one of the first things we talked about in one of our board meetings. I said, before we do anything, who has authority here? I asked. So do you think that guy there has authority? Do you think that I have authority? People were silent. They didn't know what to say. They said, probably, yeah, you're the pastor, so you must have some authority. And I said, no, I don't think he has authority. I don't think she has authority. And I certainly know that I don't have any authority unless we are living in the way of Jesus and speaking in such a way that our words and our deeds are in harmony with what Jesus taught. Then maybe we have some authority. So it's hard to reshape our understanding of authority around what Jesus is teaching here. But it's so important. The first thing we need to do here today is to pay attention and redefine what is authority. Jesus gives the disciples authority to do what He does. So 2 things to keep in mind here, and I try to write it on the board. Number 1, authority comes from God. Very interesting. Authority is not humanly created. Authority is not determined by preferences or committees who assign roles of authority for whoever they wish is best. Those who have authority will live, those who truly have authority will live in such a way that their authority will be felt regardless if that authority is blessed by committees of human men or women or not. That's why people like Stephen, and we talked about him back in the day here in our sermons on Matthew. We jumped to Acts in one of the sermons. I don't remember which one it was. But that's why he was killed. The one who had true authority, who embraced the reality of the kingdom of heaven and the narrative of the story of Israel through what Jesus had accomplished, expanding the lines of boundaries between who was truly the people of God and who were not. And what did the men of authority do? They killed him. Because obviously, radical ideas about what true religion is all about appear like that. You have to kill the person to kill the message. So yeah, we think that authority comes from these things, from positions. That if I'm nominated for something in a community of faith, suddenly I have some privilege and I'm in a higher caste. Nothing could be more subversive to the gospel of Jesus Christ than thinking that by having authority you have some privilege over people. Because this is literally the opposite of what authority is to Jesus. So number 1 thing we need to keep in mind is that authority comes from God. It's not determined by committees. So it's a serious thing. Authority is given to those who are humble enough to listen and to live according to the Word. And that authority will be recognized by those who also are sensitive to the things of the Spirit. Number 2 is that authority, although it comes from God, it is not given for self. It is given for service. Always. Power and authority in the Bible are given for service, for others, and not for the ones who truly receive it to keep it to themselves. Jesus gives authority to the disciples to do what He does, literally to serve, to suffer with. That is what authority is all about. And we're going to see throughout the gospel that the disciples don't get it. They're still trying to dispute who is going to be greater in the kingdom of Jesus, who is going to do that, because they're still thinking under the concepts and ideology found in empire, where authority is given and suddenly I'm better than the other. In Jesus, that kingdom of men is subverted and turned upside down, and the last will be first. The greater is the one who serves. And I've seen it. We don't understand it either. We think that by being something in the church, suddenly we're better. Not all of them think like that. Some do. And I feel for them. They didn't understand what the gospel is all about. Jesus gives the disciples authorities to serve the harassed and the helpless, to embody the inaugurated kingdom of heaven. And Christianity has confused, obviously, authority and power with personal prerogatives for control and personal ambition. when authority is given for service. When authority and power are used for personal reasons or outside of service, they are inevitably abused and used for oppression, and we've seen it. And it's tragic because it happens under the reality of religion, in the name of God, abuse, because of authority and power. So knowing that authority comes from God and is given for service, it's a helpful thing. It's important. It's crucial for us to begin there. That's what authority in the Bible is, from God, for service. Anything else is a perversion of what we find in the text. So now that we know this, let's move to Jesus' instruction to the disciples when they go out to do ministry. And let's compare them to our ministry, to what we do together. So let's continue reading. We'll pick up on verse 5 now. Text says, "These 12 Jesus sent out, instructing them, 'Go nowhere among the Gentiles and enter no town of the Samaritans,'" that is, those who are not Israel. Now remember, Jesus is not being racist. No. We're going to talk about it in a minute. Later, at the end of the gospel, we'll say, "Go into all the world." So we need to keep in mind the difference. What's going on here? And why is that different from the end when Jesus says, "Go out into all the world"? Why begin with saying, "Don't go to the Gentiles or the Samaritans"? But Jesus says, verse 6, "But go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, and proclaim as you go, saying, 'The kingdom of heaven is at hand.'" It's here. Jesus said, "Heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the lepers, cast out demons." Why? Because the kingdom of heaven is not only about words or signs in the public square, it's about life, action, doing things to reveal the nature of that kingdom. Jesus goes on and says, "Acquire no gold or silver," or even before that, "You received without paying, so give without pay. Acquire no gold or silver or copper for your belts, no bag for your journey, or 2 tunics or sandals or a staff, for the laborer deserves his food. And whatever town or village you enter, find out who is worthy in it, and stay there until you depart. As you enter the house, greet it. And if the house is worthy, let your peace come upon it." See, you can offer that which you don't have. May your peace, may that which you have been experiencing with me be felt and experienced by others. But if it is not worthy, let your peace return to you. And if anyone will not receive you or listen to your words, just shake off the dust from your feet when you leave that house or town. Truly I say to you, it will be more bearable on the day of judgment for the land of Sodom and Gomorrah than for that town. And that's where we're going to pause today. So this is Jesus' first instructions. Next week we'll continue. It's going to be the hard part. Right now, the disciples are probably excited. Yeah, we're going to have authority. We're going to cast out demons. It's going to be a party for the kingdom. It's going to be great. Next week, Jesus says, and you're going to be persecuted and taken to court and killed. And they're like, oh, we didn't know about that. So we'll get to that next week. For now, let's stick with the good stuff. What can we learn from these words? How can they be helpful? I mean, these instructions were given so long ago to go into villages and towns. They seem so different, so far from our reality. But I think there are some lessons here for us. Number one thing that we need to keep in mind is the disciples and all of us, as we do, we need to think local. That's number one. Yes, the gospel will and must go out into all the world. But the beginning of that path into the world is local. To get into all the world, you're going to have to walk down your street and into your city, to those who you know, to those who are still expecting for God to do something, like the house of Israel. They were waiting for the Messiah to come. They had a context. They knew something was going to happen. So think local. Think of those who you can reach, who have some sense already of who God is and what He is doing, and help them realize that the time has come, that Jesus has come. And I tell you, say, no, everybody knows that Jesus has come. No, they don't. In fact, there's a lot, I could say a lot, about how not our church here, but the community at large across America and the world haven't come to terms with the fact that Jesus has arrived. So yes, think local. Think with who are the people I can connect, which will understand quickly what Jesus has done, what God has done through Jesus. So yes, find the lost sheep, the harassed and helpless around you. So the question is, when we think local, if we are to find the harassed and the helpless, to suffer with them, do we know who they are? Do we know their names? Do we know their stories? Do we know the name of our neighbors, the people down the street? Do we know what they're going through? Do we know what they believe in? Do we know if they're lonely? What do they believe in? How do they live? Do they have hope? Have they embraced despair? Do we know that? Because the disciples needed to think local, to go down to the villages and the towns that they knew, they had been before, and to find those who were worthy, those who were open, those who were good. So yeah, think local. That's number one. Number two, obviously, just as Jesus says, and go and announce, proclaim the kingdom and live by the principles of the kingdom. The message and the life of the disciples should be centered around the good news of the kingdom of heaven. Now, I told you, the first time we talked about the kingdom here, I told you, and I still think it's a fact, that the majority of the people who are religious have no clue what the kingdom of heaven is all about. It was the center for Jesus, center for the disciples as they do ministry. People have no clue. Why have they no clue? Because in history, with the multiplication of Christian denominations, every single denomination has a little narrative and a way to organize the truth, to make their beliefs validating and great and different from the other. So everybody has a little narrative where there are other truths that are more important than the kingdom of heaven. And this could be true for us too. I've been to 1,000 churches where people had no idea what the kingdom of heaven was, but they knew about the mark of the beast, or the Saturday as the true day, or whatever. And all these things, sure, we can talk about those things, but that's not what Jesus sent the disciples to do. Because, see, outside of the centeredness of the gospel of the kingdom of heaven, nothing can be properly understood. And that's the problem with not only our denomination, but with any denomination, of making other truths more important than what Jesus told us to do. So we can't run the risk of doing something different than what Jesus taught us to do. The kingdom of heaven is to have preeminence over any other denominational truth. And that can make people uncomfortable. But yeah, we do not live a denominational faith. That's what I think it's interesting. People say, our faith is Catholic, or our faith is Protestant, or our faith is Adventist. Our faith is based on Jesus and His righteousness. Anything else is going to be a problem. Why? Because if you have faith in your denomination will disappoint you. Your denomination will show signs of unfaithfulness once in a while. Now, you won't find that in God or in Jesus, who revealed the righteousness and faithfulness of God. This is why our work, no matter where you're at or what denomination you go to, is to train the congregation and the believers to place their faith in Jesus and nothing else. That's it. There is no one else for me, the song says. None but Jesus, and Jesus is enough. In fact, just think about, I don't know if you come here, if you go to another denomination, I don't know where you are, but one of the tests that I would do if I went into any church right now is, to determine if this is a church, a community I want to be part of. The question I would ask is Jesus enough in that community? Or do we have Jesus plus a lot of other things? No, is Jesus enough? Because that's what Jesus is all about. Go out and announce the kingdom of heaven, or what I have done. Over history, we have alternative things. We confuse it all. So yes, if Jesus tells us to announce and proclaim the gospel of the kingdom and live according to it, that's what we're going to do. I think Jesus is enough. But again, this is not only about talk, this is about action. It's about being attentive to the suffering, to be sensitive to abuse and injustice, and to liberate people as Jesus did on His day. That's why Jesus says, proclaim the kingdom and heal the disease, cast out the demons that society and people have imposed upon one another. The principles of darkness and empire are still out there. Go out and show people that there is a better way to live. That following the way of God as revealed in Jesus doesn't make us isolated from people. It makes us more human and connected to other human beings. So yeah, if we have been with Jesus, the crucified one, we will be sensitive to suffering, to abuse, to oppression, and to injustice, and to turn our backs from those who are harassed and helpless. Under those conditions is as if, wrote Jose Pagola, we are turning our backs to Jesus, the crucified one Himself. So if we look at Jesus, the one who was oppressed, tortured, abused, abandoned, rejected, if we don't look at that, if we don't remain there, we will be insensitive to abuse, to oppression, to torture, to isolation, to oppression, to injustice. But if we have been with Jesus, if we have realized what He has done, we will be sensitive to the other instances when that happens. So the disciples are to go and to announce the kingdom in speech and in life, to speak and to act. So after these initial instructions, Jesus turns to the way the disciples are to go. So first of all, they are to think local, the direction. They are to think kingdom, words and deeds. That's how you're going to go. And now the methodology. I mean, what do you do? Okay, you go, and then what are we to do? Jesus is going to talk about that. And like I said, there might be some important lessons here for us today. And I'm losing all my markers today. I think in every sermon they fall at least twice. But anyway. So yes, Jesus goes on to say, we talked about go nowhere to the Gentiles, announce the kingdom, heal the sick. And then He says, you receive without pain. Give without pay, acquire no gold or silver or copper for your belts, no bag for your journey, or tunics or sandals or a staff. So Jesus says, basically, first thing that we need to know is think generosity. Be generous to people. Give from what you have received. The ministry is to be done in the rhythms of generosity and not greed. Yeah. Do not go out to take from people. That's the way of the world, always finding new ways to take. But go out to give. In fact, Jesus goes on to advise them to take no bag for your journey. What bag is this? That is, do not give any hint that you are out there to beg for money or to do people a favor in exchange of something else. This is not the kingdom. You have freely received, so freely give. Kingdom of heaven is a marvelous, great reality that people can experience now. So don't reduce it to little financial exchanges or little favors. That's not what it's about. And I just think about all those ministries that are based on money and always asking money. And instead of seeing that money go out, and it's like the pastor has a jet or some great car or whatever, because it's something weird. It's literally the opposite of what we find here. Don't go and take, go and give freely from what you have received. Don't even take bags so that people don't have an impression that they are to pay for whatever you're doing. The kingdom doesn't belong to you. You are ambassadors of it. You point people and show them how to get there. You're a means and not an end. If they are to give, and they will give, it's not for you, it's for those who need. The harassed and the helpless all around. So yeah, do not reduce the kingdom to monetary exchanges. So think generosity. Go out keeping in mind that it's not about you, it's about the kingdom for others. That authority is for others. That power is for others. And every good thing you have received from God is not for you, but for others. Yeah. We need to hear this for sure. We need to be reminded of this constantly as we do ministry. And then Jesus says, don't acquire gold or copper or take tunics and sandals and staff. To simplify it really is to think simplicity. Don't go out showing off, sign, pastor's coming, an apostle is... Be simple. Don't give away your subversive mission. Walk around so that people won't even notice that you're there. But so that they will feel the reality of the kingdom when you leave. That the peace has come upon them, that something has changed, that they have understood something from God and Jesus about the promised Messiah and the kingdom that was to come. It's not about you. So think simplicity. This is a beautiful image of the complete dependence the disciples are also to have of Jesus. So to think simplicity, don't take a bunch of things. Well, some of these things are necessary, the disciples could have told Jesus. How am I not going to go with a staff? That's for self-protection. How am I not going to go with silver and some gold? What if nothing happens? So apart from the fact that they're not supposed to have outward signs of pointing to them, they are to go in a simple way to show their dependence upon God. God will take care of you, as He took care of me. Jesus said, when somebody says, I want to follow you, He said, oh, you don't even know where I sleep. I have nowhere to go. I'm homeless. You want that? So yeah, Jesus is not asking anything that He hasn't done Himself. And the point is not to become homeless. The point is to live life with a complete dependence on the faithfulness of God, who took care of Jesus and who will take care of His disciples as they go. They are to depend on the provision of God and the generosity of other people who they'll meet. They are not to appear to be on a journey or to give away their role. They are to work in stealth, not even taking a staff for self-protection, as I said. They are to be as ambassadors of the kingdom, and they will be maintained and protected by God, the God of Jesus, the true shepherd. So if the disciples are to go as sheep, and we'll talk about that next week. We talked about it last week. We'll talk about it next week again. The disciples are to go as sheep. They need no staff. They will be protected by their heavenly shepherd. So yeah, a life of ministry, the simplicity, points to this complete trust. They live in simplicity because they have learned how to trust. So the only way to go in simplicity is to trust that God will provide, that God will protect, that God will be with them. And it's interesting because it's so different to do ministry here. I went to Africa when I was younger to do evangelism and to help communities there that were hungry and had issues. So we did a bunch of things. So it wasn't evangelism of saying, oh, here's some white content for you to believe in. No, it's to be with them, to see what their needs are, to engage, the leaders of the town to make sure that they were attended, that, hunger was addressed and poverty was addressed and lack of water was addressed. And I remember that at night we did have meetings where we talked about the kingdom of heaven. We spent the day with them trying to practice that, and then at night we talked about it. So it was actually a good structure because we lived it before we talked about it, so it was good. And then at night, suddenly the light went off. Generator was shot. So here in America, we would just call a number, say, hey, light went off. I don't know how long it would take. Light would probably come back on. That's it. Or our cars are outside. Let's go outside or put our lights on and we'll be okay, something. It's very easy. In Africa or in Bissau, where I was, no number to call. So we prayed all the time. When there was no water, when there was no food, when there was no help, when there was no light, we prayed. So it's interesting that, when we don't have that ease around us, how much we rely on God for things. Now from that, we need to reevaluate how we do ministry in ministry now. We need to depend on God the same way, to pray, to trust that He will provide, and that's how we'll live in simplicity, in the simplicity that Jesus is talking about now. So yeah. Now we should pause, obviously, here and think about it. Any person would stop and say, hey, this is very hard, probably uncomfortable. After all, they're to go out with literally nothing, no money, no staff for protection. How can we live like this today? And here's the key. Because Jesus said, you have received mercy, grace, forgiveness, peace, assurance, joy. It's not, you see, there needs to be a reorientation in our mind. We think it's nothing or simplicity, but the fact of the matter is, they don't have any money, they don't have a staff, they don't even take a second jacket. What if it rips like this? They don't have another one, and what are we to do? So they have nothing. See, that's actually the opposite. The reason why they go in simplicity is not because they have embraced nothingness. No, it's because they recognize that they have everything they need. And what is it? What is the list of things they need? Well, mercy, grace, forgiveness, peace, assurance, joy. They have everything they need. So trust God and go. Wow, think about it. In the end, this is a question of what truly makes us feel complete, fulfilled, ready for ministry. The disciples go out as Jesus did, relying and trusting in the provision and faithfulness of the Father. That if his eyes are on the sparrow, and if he knows the hairs in our head and the little things, he'll take care of you. It's to go not from scarcity, but from an abundance that other people don't recognize as abundance. From abundance to service. So what a radical way to frame what ministry should strive to be. First, a recognition that in Jesus and in trust in God we have everything we need. So this simplicity here, it's simple. Yeah, why? Because there's trust that we have in God and in Jesus everything that we truly need. And number two, we go out to give from what we have received. So it's not that they have nothing and then they're going to try to do something. No, they come from this abundance of what they have received in God to give freely from what they have received. From abundance to service. So while this might seem, they're going out with nothing. No, they're going with everything. It's just that we don't consider that everything. So yeah. And the last thing, obviously, is this weird saying that the disciples are to go into the villages, look for somebody who's worthy. If they answer, your peace will be there. If they don't answer, leave and dust off your boots as you get out. So it's quite interesting. So the disciples are to go. So think simplicity, and then they go into that way into the villages. So good. They go into the villages to the people who are good, dignified, worthy, sincere. Why go there first? Why look for those who are worthy? Well, because that is probably a sign that they have been sensitive to the grace that is all around. They will recognize in your voice the voice of the Spirit who is at work in them. So the disciples are to remain there until the household and town are able to hear about the kingdom of heaven, to see it for themselves, and to live within it, to know that the awaited time of the Messiah and the kingdom has come, has arrived. So if the people are not or accepting, phenomenal, great. But if the people do not receive them, if they are closed to what the Spirit is doing in the world, just move away, Jesus says. Don't, without any drama, noise, or signs of frustration, just take the dust off of your shoes in the house or in the village and just go. Without much drama. Just leave. There is a good chance that they are living like the people in Sodom and Gomorrah. So that's why Jesus closes with such strong words. Truly, I say to you, it will be more bearable on that day of judgment for the land of Sodom and Gomorrah than for the town, or the household that rejects you. Now, why is that so strong? Well, because there's a chance that they're living like the inhabitants of Sodom and Gomorrah. It's an interesting connection. So what does this mean? And we'll close with that. What was the problem with Sodom and Gomorrah? Obviously, you know the story back in Genesis, right? There's Abraham and Lot. Abraham chooses after Lot, who chooses to go to the lands of Sodom and Gomorrah, where there is no city and technology and urban life. Abraham is out in the wilderness somewhere. And then, God just turns to Abraham and says, hey, there's a problem there, and I don't think they're going to make it. I don't like what I'm seeing there in that town, and I don't think it's going to work out. And then Abraham says, well, isn't there anybody who's good in there? Maybe 15 or 10 or 5? And God says, no, not good. But Lot, Abraham's nephew, is in the city. So God says, I'll take care of Lot, and then he sends angels there and takes them out. So that's sort of the story. Then fire comes down, destroys the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. Pretty bloody, crazy story there. So why does Jesus bring up Sodom and Gomorrah here as the disciples are going out with their message of the kingdom and to do these good things? Such a radical connection. Jesus says there's going to be more mercy on the inhabitants of Sodom and Gomorrah than those who reject the good news that there is a better kingdom of grace, justice, and peace. So I think the hint is obviously that if they're rejecting that message, it's probably because they're living like the citizens of Sodom and Gomorrah. So the question here is, as we close, is what were the sins of the inhabitants of Sodom and Gomorrah? Now here's where evangelicals, Christianity loves to talk about sexuality and where things go and what is appropriate and not appropriate, because evangelicals and Christians love that stuff. And so they think of Sodom and Gomorrah, and basically what happens is they impose on Sodom and Gomorrah the things that they consider very bad sins. That's why I like the Bible, because the Bible tries to help us clarify things. But it's up to us to hear it and live by it. So let me go back to Ezekiel. Talked about Ezekiel last week. So let me read you a text. What were the sins of Sodom and Gomorrah? Great question. If you go to YouTube, you'll probably find a different list. But Ezekiel chapter 16, verse 49 gives us an answer. Quite interesting, in fact. Ezekiel chapter 16, verse 49 says, "Behold, this was the guilt of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters had pride, excess of food, and prosperous ease." And I love another version that says they were overfed and unconcerned. Wow. Let's read that again. She and her daughters had pride, arrogance. They were overfed and they were unconcerned in prosperous ease and did not aid or regard the poor and needy. They were haughty and did an abomination before me. So I removed them when I saw it. So notice how God doesn't have a stomach for the things that are still prevalent in our society today. Interesting. In fact, we accuse others of being, that's not a big sin. That's just laziness, or people are not working hard enough, or But notice the anger of God when these sins are performed. So what are these sins? Let me write them on the board for you to have them. Number one, what was the sin of Sodom? Arrogance. So don't lose sight of the connection. Why would people deny the message of the gospel of the kingdom? Of peace, of joy, of justice, of gladness. Why? Because they live in opposition to all of those things. Obviously, they're arrogant. That's mistake number one. Number two, they are overfed and therefore unconcerned. Yep. They have food. Why should I worry about everybody else? If my belly is full, why should I worry about those who have nothing? What matters is me and my best interest. Yeah. Still happens right now. Arrogance. Overfed, unconcerned, and lastly, disregard for the poor. He said, I thought that the problem of Sodom and Gomorrah was a sexual thing. Well, how interesting that it's not. It's a sin, a list of sins that hits close to home now, isn't it? The sin of arrogance, of thinking that we know better. And when we're arrogant, we're not humble. When we're arrogant and not humble, we're not listening to the Word of God, who is truly wise and the one who knows about things. So if I'm arrogant, my hands are not open to receive wisdom from God, because that requires humility that arrogance does not have. So the sins of Sodom began with arrogance, then with an ease, a prosperity ease of reaching 401ks, of thinking about their overfeeding and how they were at ease, to the point of being unconcerned about anybody else. So it's not a matter of being fed. No problem there. Not problem being prosperous at all. The problem is allowing these things to make you unconcerned about others, except for self, leading them to disregard the poor and the needy. Those were the sins of Sodom and Gomorrah, and yes, those are the sins found in our society again. In Santa Fe, there is not one corner you cross with your car without seeing a homeless person. And I've heard in the past people say, well, the homeless here in Santa Fe are too spoiled. Yeah, obviously. That's something somebody says, the type of person that has never been at a homeless shelter, that doesn't know one name, that doesn't know one story, but just reads things here and there. Aren't even able to see suffering where suffering resides. There's no gut-wrenching pain. There's no suffering for those who are harassed and helpless. So I hope you're putting these dots together. Because if the community doesn't live as an alternative to empire, then there's no hope for the community of faith. There's no hope for the city of Santa Fe. There's no hope for America. There's no hope for anybody. So that's how the disciples are to go. With an authority that comes from God for service. Thinking local. Thinking about the kingdom. Thinking about generosity. Thinking simplicity that comes from trust. And realizing that if people deny all these things, is because they are probably living under the principles of Sodom and Gomorrah, which are arrogance, overfed and unconcerned and completely aloof and disconnected from the true needs of the world. So how is our ministry? How is our life? How do we interpret it when we compare it to Jesus' list of what ministry looks like? That's the big question. So here in town, the homeless shelter, the Interfaith Homeless Shelter, commonly known as Pete's Place, they need help right now. Because obviously in our city there are great, generous people. And there are people who don't understand that there are needs and that there are people who are helpless and who couldn't care less for them. So Pete's Place needs help to renew their 4-year lease to continue helping the less fortunate in our community. I'll leave some information in the comments below, but if you need more information, please write me in my email and I can give you all the information you need to know how you can help our homeless shelter right here, who does work in ministry that is even better than a lot of churches out there these days. They are truly the apostles of Jesus, who are going out and serving the harassed and helpless, those whose society has chewed and spit out because they are worthless to the principles of the kingdoms of men, but not so for those who are sensitive to the work of God, to the principles of the kingdom of heaven, and to the work of the Spirit within and outside of us. So may we look at the list. May we reevaluate what authority is. May we go out with all of these things to suffer with those who need help, so that we might live like Jesus, the one who had no place to go, just like our homeless around town. And as you help them, as you look at them, may you realize that you're looking at Jesus himself. Because Jesus will end the Gospel of Matthew saying, everything you do to these little ones, you have done to me. You're waiting for Jesus to return. It's good. He returns every day when we approach the helpless, the homeless, the disregarded, the poor, and the needy. Jesus is on the street right now. Will we serve him? Let's pray together. Dear God, thank you for Jesus. Thank you for reminding us what ministry looks like. And may we embrace this authority given from God through Jesus. And may we use it to serve others around us. So bless us as a community of faith here in Santa Fe and Los Alamos. Bless every single individual who's watching right now. May your Spirit help us reevaluate our heart and our mind to reshape our vision around the vision of Jesus for ministry and life in the kingdom, I pray. In the name of Jesus, amen. It was a joy. I'll see you next week. Be safe and be well.